everyone? Okay, that's great. I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
Let's make the speakers then. No, don't push the microphone. So. Are we getting? Okay, we got participants in here. We're still garbled. It's weird.
Testing audio settings.
Friends who have, just would you type in the chat that we're testing the audio? I think I want to test it from the front. So if you don't mind. Okay. Hey, can you hear me? I'm just testing. Can you hear me? Testing. Can you hear me pretty well? Oh. Hi, I'm with the Friends of St. Paul Library. This is my speaking voice. Can you hear me? Quiet. It was quiet. We're testing out some audio here. Could you speak quiet for a second, please? Hi, we're testing audio of the Friends of St. Paul Library. Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? This is my speaking voice. Testing audio. Hi, can you hear me? This sounds pretty good. Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me? Let me know when you're ready to start the program. Okay. Let me know. Testing audio. Testing audio. Testing audio. Hi, can you hear me? This is testing. With the Friends of St. Paul Library, testing audio. Testing audio. Testing audio, can you hear me?
One time. Okay, some folks are saying that yes, they can hear you, but.
Oh, and some folks can't hear me, okay.
Okay, great. You've got on the side.
Okay.
From the Lawrence of these. Okay, that could be them.
Sounds good, we ready?
Oh, all right. Okay.
Oh, testing.
Here's parking. Excited that they should just do this.
Oh, and then we will need to pass mics between each other. Oh, let me just quickly ask. Hi, testing. We're good? Okay.
It's fuzzy.
I think we're gonna have to tell the turn captions and we'll work with it. We'll keep troubleshooting.
And Nigar, we're gonna pass the mic between each other.
Yes.
Okay. We will pass the mic between each other, okay?
Okay.
Thank you all for being patient. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dralandra Larkins, and I'm your host tonight for the Fireside Reading Series. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends of St. Paul Library longest running program celebrating 30 seasons in partnership with the St. Paul Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight here at the Rondo Community Library. Fireside is made possible through the Minnesota State Legislature to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library as the Minnesota Center for the Book. Books for sale this evening are kindly provided by Black Garnet, located at University Avenue. We're so grateful for your support and your presence here tonight with us. We will begin with a reading by Nigar, our author, and then open things up from questions from you, the audience. When we do this, please wait for someone with a camera-linked mic to get to you. It makes it a bit easier for the audience at home and here in the room. Friends online, we have someone in the room to relay your questions. I'm happy to introduce Nigar Alam. Born in Karachi, Pakistan, Nigar Alam spent her childhood in Turkey, Nigeria, Italy, Kenya, Indonesia, and the United States before returning to Karachi. With an MBA and CPA, she has worked in both brand management and auditing. Currently, Alam teaches at Anoka-Ramsey Community College and lives with her family here in Minnesota. Thank you for joining us. So then I'd just like to open up with a reading from you, Nigar, and then any questions that you may have for the audience and questions the audience have from us.
Okay, should I hold both of these things?
Yes, but you can actually click that there, or you can hold it as well.
Okay, I can just put it on my lap?
Yep.
Okay, and does this sound good? All right. Well, thank you so much. It was just such an honor to be here at Fireside Reading, and couldn't imagine that I would ever be part of this series. So, and thank you all for showing up tonight. I am the author of Under the Tamarind Tree, and I'm going to read the prologue. And the prologue is very short. And as you'll see, the main character, Rozeena, is just 9 years old in the prologue. But the rest of the book follows her and her family and friends when she is either in her 20s or in her 80s. So the prologue is really just a very special one scene of Rozeena as a child. Okay. No, should I? Okay, whatever you feel. Is this good? All right. 9-year-old Rozeena stared ahead, squinting in the dark at the hordes of shouting people racing toward her family. Were those sticks and spears raised above their heads? Why were they so angry? Her mother grabbed Rozeena's wrist and pulled her off the tonga. She landed hard on her knees, but her father didn't stop to check the bleeding skin below her frock's hem. Her mother only yanked harder, pulling and dragging until Rozeena got up, running. She had to run so fast, she had no breath left to ask why they couldn't go home. Wouldn't they be safe if they just went back? It wasn't even far. The house in front of Rozeena exploded into flames. Fire leapt into the night sky, and dense smoke entered her nose, scorching her insides. September's humidity already dripped streams of sweat down her face and back. Now it all bubbled to a boil. Rozeena spun to her mother. Light from the flames swirled on her face. She stood frozen in place, confusion and fear contorting her mouth into pained twists. Swiveling on her feet, Rozeena searched for her father and Faisal, but they weren't there. Bodies with bundles of clothing and suitcases and children in their arms ran around haphazardly, their screaming faces blurred by darkness. She turned back to her mother. "Ummi, I can't find," but a mass of people were racing toward them now from the direction of the fire. Every second, the men grew closer and louder, as did their thunderous, angry yelling. Why? Her mother didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran, her hold like an iron cuff on Rozeena's wrist. Crowds pushed against them from the front and back until they ripped right through her mother's tight grip. Rozeena was pitched away, bodies shoved against her, colliding from all sides as she scrambled to her feet, trying to keep her head up, eyes searching. 2 women ran toward her, mouths open, arms waving overhead. Were they neighbors? Would they take her to her mother? But instead of stopping, the women charged into Rozeena, throwing her flat on her back. Gasping to catch her breath, she tried to stand up against the wave of bigger, stronger bodies, but her already bleeding knees fell hard on the ground over and over. "Rosie? Rosie!" Her head shot up. "Here, here!" She spun around, searching, and saw Faisal. His face grew in size, running toward her, the whites of his eyes reflecting the light from the burning house behind her. Rosie, he screamed again. Run, Rosie, run. Where to? Behind her was the raging fire and the approaching mob, and in front, from a lane across the street, a bigger, even louder group of men emerged. Faisal pushed her toward the fire, pointing at the house next to it, a safe house where their parents were headed. It would lead to another house behind it. Another house? A safe house? He shook her by the shoulders and aimed her toward it. That way, just run, Rosie, run. Without looking back, she ran like she'd never run before. That was the last time Rozeena saw her brother.
Thank you for that reading, Nigar. And when I was reading your bio, I couldn't help but notice that you lived in places like Karachi, Indonesia, Nigeria. And I'm wondering if there's any connection to your childhood and your book title, Under the Tamarind Tree, and the inspiration behind your book's title as well.
Yes, the title, actually, there's a very interesting story about the title. The inspiration is the fact that we have tamarind trees. They're indigenous in Pakistan, and you see them in Karachi. They're very large, and they have that fruit, the tamarind fruit, which we use for cooking and for chutneys and such things. When I wrote the book, I submitted it before it was finished to this mentorship program. So it was just a few chapters. And I had imagined that the tamarind tree would be in it, but I hadn't actually gotten there yet, you know? So when I submitted it to this mentorship and it got accepted, one of the questions that my agent said to me was that, you know, it was great and I look forward to working with you on it. Where's the tamarind tree? So that just shows you the process of writing. The book involves a lot of revisions. Yes.
And then just quickly want to open it up to our audience. Any questions so far? Okay. So for you, where does this story start? So, you know, Rosie, she's a young adult, and then she becomes an older woman. Where does the story start for you? And why do you want to start it there for readers?
That's a great question. And I have to say that the first chapter is the one thing that hasn't changed in all the revisions and everything. I think it might be the only thing that hasn't changed. And I did want to start it in the present day and show what happens and how life is in the present day, and then take the reader back to say why. So I'm answering the question, why? Why is this the situation? And as you mentioned, the story is told in two different timelines. So it goes from the present day to 1964, back and forth to tell this story. And in 1964, Rozeena is in her 20s, and she's living in Karachi, and she has these three very close childhood friends that she grew up with in that one neighborhood. But they're holding secrets from each other. And that's what leads to that tragedy that changes their lives forever.
So you do mention that there's a big secret. And so that kind of goes into my next question here. So there would be no book without the big silence between Rosie and her four friends. And so I'm wondering, how do you keep this secret away from us and then also let the characters develop in their monologues throughout the book without actually exposing the big secret?
Yes, no spoilers today. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. You will just have to read it. Yes. That's tricky. That's tricky to engage the reader so that they're interested enough to turn the page and yet not give away too much. And when it came down to those very detailed revisions with the tension and the suspense, I actually did make a spreadsheet. Yes, I did. An Excel spreadsheet, you know. And because I needed to track who knows what when, and yet there was just no way of keeping all of that information in my mind. And I didn't want to make any mistakes, and I didn't want there to be plot holes. So I did use a spreadsheet ultimately, yes. Yeah.
We're going to take a question from one of our audience members.
So I'm curious about the history of the book and your history as a writer and maybe how it all came together.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. The history of the book is that it was inspired by a personal story of my family. It grew from my desire to know more about my parents' youth and their family struggles during and after partition. And partition is a historical event, which I'm going to try to summarize in 3 sentences. So here we go. It was an event that happened in 1947, and it was in the region of South Asia, which today are the countries of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And that region was called British India at that time because it had been a colony for a couple of centuries. And in 1947, the people of the land finally got their independence. Everyone rejoiced, but that time of partition in which the 2 independent nations of Pakistan and India were created, it came with a lot of chaos, a lot of violence, and it resulted in one of the largest human migrations in history. So over 15 million people were displaced and up to 1 million died. And my parents were part of that migration as children. So their families fled their homes and crossed the border into Pakistan. And even though this event happened 20 years before this book even begins, the reason it's such a prominent part of the character's backstory is because my characters, Rozeena and her childhood friends, would have been children at the time of partition, just like my parents. So I wanted to examine the trauma that children go through when they live through an event like that and survive it, and how the ripples are felt even well into their adulthood. Yes. Should I continue with the writing journey?
Sure.
Yes, okay. I think that was the second part of the question. So as I was mentioning to some of you before the event when we were chatting, I was just blown away by this literary community in Minnesota. When we moved here, yes, I had no idea what a blessing it would be. I tell people, don't tell anyone about Minnesota. It's a hidden gem. Let's keep it to ourselves, okay? And I had always written, but in short form. And about 9 years ago, I wanted to write a novel. And because I'm a bit of a nerd, as you probably got from my spreadsheet, I said, I have to study. I have to study writing. And I couldn't enroll in any degree program for a number of reasons. But I took a class at the Loft Literary Center, and I just fell into 4 years of intense, concentrated studies with classes and all the craft books I could get my hands on, and author talks, hugely inspiring to me. And you can go and attend an author talk every day here, and conferences. And I just wrote a book while I was learning. I wrote a book in those 4 years, which is not published, which is in a drawer, but I learned a lot, and it was just great learning. And then I started my second book, which is my debut. Yes. So I built an amazing community, and I owe it to that community. I owe this book to them.
Thank you, Nigar. So you speak about it, and there's also a theme in the book on generational trauma. Yet the book is fiction genre. So can you speak about how you take a topic like gentrification and generational trauma and fictionalize it in a way that's relatable to readers, and then also in a way that's not too heavy for readers as well? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, that's not a hard question. Oh, so easy. This was something that is personal in our family. And so when I thought of writing, I reached out to family first, right? As I would, because they've lived through it. Growing up, we were only told one or two really pleasant stories about partition. And so I reached out and I said, tell me more. And nobody wanted to revisit that time, and it was very hard. So I switched immediately to newspaper archives and works by historians, the more traditional way of researching. And when I did that, I discovered that there are many, many survivors of partition who have never spoken about their experiences. And now there's this huge effort to collect their oral histories and archive them, because it's been 76 years since the event. So even if they were children at that time, so there are fewer survivors every year in the world. And then I realized that my family is not the only one, who's not speaking. I wanted to fictionalize their emotional truths without invading their privacy. Yeah. And I didn't want it to be very heavy and extremely traumatic for the reader themselves. But I think by maybe moving around so much as a child, I don't know, but I feel like we are inherently all the same. We all have the same human beings in all the different countries I lived in, made friends everywhere, lost those friends when I moved. But I just knew that we have the same fears, the same joys, the same hopes. And if I could connect with the reader at that level, then this story, which is on the other side of the world in a different time period and a completely different culture, I could make perhaps, hopefully, the reader feel for those people too, and feel that generational effect of the trauma that the children lived through.
Questions from the audience?
So has any of your family or friends or people who have lived through partition, have they read the book and have they given you any feedback?
Yes, my parents have read the book. And I was concerned, actually, I was being interviewed in a podcast, and the interviewer said, what were you really worried about your parents reading in the book? And the first thing that came to my mind was the kissing. I was like, I'm so old and I was still worried. And obviously they know people do that. I don't want to think about that though. But then when I thought about it afterwards, I did feel that I was concerned about their approval of the emotions that the characters felt, and if that was true to them. And they're my parents. They loved the book, but I think they actually did feel that I did a good job in representing that time. Yes.
And you talk about how when writing the book, you reached out to friends and family. I'm also wondering, did you do any scholarly research for this book? You talk a little bit about the history of Pakistan and what led to the theme of the book. Did that contribute to any scholarly work that you did, or?
There's just such wonderful material out there by historians and academics. And so I even read fiction, because sometimes you need to do that too. And so I did a lot of reading. In terms of research, I feel it's so easy to just do research forever. You fall down that rabbit hole. So I did do research for about a year, in which I was writing and rewriting the first, I would say, 50 pages over and over again. That seems to be my process. It's not very efficient, but it takes me a while to figure out the characters. And the only way I can do that is to put them in different situations. And the research allows me to come up with those situations, because they have to be true to the time. And so once I thought I had enough to start, I did start writing, and otherwise I would have just continued doing the research. Yes. Yeah.
We're taking questions from the audience.
Since you've started to talk about kind of your writing process, can you just kind of keep going on that theme and talk about, do you like outline your book? Do you just write? Do you know how it's going to end? All those kinds of questions.
I wish I had a spreadsheet for that. Yes. So my process is that I tend to know where the book is going to begin. As I said, that first chapter didn't change. And the prologue came very late, but that first chapter was pretty much the same. And I know where the book is going to end. It's just all the middle part that I need to figure out. And I do that by starting with character. I really focus on character. And of course, you have to do the research to have a realistic character for that time period. But I need to figure out who the character is, what she wants, and why she wants it, and then what's in her way. And I just make that, I think I make a hand scribbled kind of bicycle wheel with spokes. And so my main character, this is really rough thinking right in the beginning. You asked for my process. I just put the main character in the center, and then around her, all of the other characters, and try to connect, like how are they connected and what do they want from each other? And so I think I focus a lot on character, and then the plot and the setting comes later. Yes. I wish I could plot out the whole thing and just write from A to Z, but I can't do it. It just is a lot of writing and rewriting. Yes.
We're taking a question from the audience.
I've got two. One is based on language. What was your first language? And did that affect the writing? The second is, in terms of all the characters, was there one that challenged you the most? And if it made you grow, how did it make you grow?
So in terms of language, I'm trying to think what language I learned first. I'll have to ask my mom about that. But English is now my first language. Yes, I'm definitely more proficient in it. I think I probably spoke Urdu first because I was living there till I was 2, and then we moved to Nigeria. And I wasn't speaking the local language there, so I was definitely speaking Urdu. And I don't know if it's made my writing process any different. I think in both languages, I've lived in Pakistan as an adult for over a decade too. So I'm very comfortable in that language. I joke sometimes because my daughter's friends, when they were smaller and I would pick them up from school, Molly would get in the back and I'd say in Urdu to her, shut the door, and she would do it. And so I feel like, because it would just slip out, because I'm just, if I see my daughter, I'd speak to her in that language and I'd speak to her friend. And I feel like her friends now understand certain phrases, which is wonderful. So I think I'm very comfortable in both languages and cultures. And I hope that allows for that bridge. I hope it allows for the bridge from a very different society to the reader here, to make it a very smooth process. Yes. And
then the second part of that question was, were there any characters that was difficult for you to write? So I know that, Rosie is our main character. Were there any characters that was difficult or challenging that maybe even provoked emotions for you that you had been hidden for a while?
It's a great question. My favorite character, since they're not my children, I can say this, is Rozeena. She really is. I'm just so proud of her. Even though she's older than me now, but I can still be proud of her. And I think she overcame a lot of personal tragedy, of course, but also she overcame societal expectations, which is really a very big thing. And in some cultures more so, and to fight against what is expected and what is the norm, and yet to do it in a respectful way. So finding that balance between your own needs and other, society's needs. So she brought out the most emotions in me while I was writing her. And one interesting thing about characters was that in the revision phase, my editor did suggest that I expand the impact of the characters that are not living. So, for example, her father and her brother, and that was harder for me to do because it didn't come naturally. And it's can't be really done in a very traditional way of them walking into the room either. So I would say that bringing the ghosts of her past onto the page and with that emotional punch was probably the most challenging for me.
I love that so much, to honor and expand on the characters who are the dead. And that actually kind of reminds me of just the importance of honoring, those who have passed away. And then also what you speak about earlier, and just honoring the history so that we know where the story takes place and why we started there. I kind of want to go back to your statement in the beginning when you were talking about the first chapter. And you said during your editing and writing process, the first chapter never changed. Why is that? What's so special? What is in the first chapter that you're like, I'm not changing anything?
Well, it wasn't my decision at all. I mean, if it had been my decision, I would have been like, I wrote a book, here it is, it's perfect. Yeah. But the first chapter was actually what got me into this mentorship program, which got me the literary agent. And so I feel like maybe that 1 year when I was doing research and writing the first 50 pages over and over again, it was really polished. And I kind of had figured out where I want to take these characters and where they are today. And so just that first chapter was pretty polished. And because the direction didn't change much, because I knew the end too, it stayed the same, but it's very rare, I think. It's very rare. And the prologue, of course, then showed up. Close to the end of the revisions, the prologue showed up.
And then too, can you speak about the writing inspiration itself? So I know you said that, some of it comes from the history of your family. And is that usually how most of your stories come about? Do you write from life?
I've written one novel before, the one that's in the drawer, and that was at all from life as such. It was suspense. I like dead bodies. There's one in this, but you will have to read to find out. So I think it was just a very different genre that I was writing before, and I don't know what I'll write next. Well, I do, but I'm not sharing. And so, but the inspiration did come from family, and the fact that they are 4 childhood friends. I was thinking that I've always been fascinated by childhood friends because I kept on losing them. And I've always wondered how it would be to live in one place and grow up in one place, And I know people have come up to me and said, well, we couldn't wait to get out of that town that we lived in, for 18 years. But we all wonder about what we don't have, and we wonder about the other people's experience. And maybe that's what inspired me to fictionalize these characters being 4 childhood friends and all of the conflicts that can arise from that too. And that's why we read books, to find out other people's experiences.
Are there any characters in the book that you wish you would have expanded more on for character development?
It's a very interesting question. Well, I can tell you one that I added very late. And so that was kind of a expansion. But there is a character called Sweetie in the book who is not at all sweet. Yes, yeah, she's not at all sweet. And she was a late entry. So when I wrote the book, there were no major revisions that my agent suggested about characters. They seemed to all have a purpose and work well together. But he did suggest some comments in this long letter, which is called an editorial letter, about some missing concepts. And I was trying to figure out how to put all of that in the manuscript. And Sweetie appeared. And so Sweetie was my answer to a lot of his questions. And she pretty much appeared in her full form. And then she has a couple of pretty important scenes too. Yeah.
So in your book, there's many themes on, obviously generational trauma, and then we talk about overcoming, and then there's joy and friendship. Are there any themes in the book that you want readers to take away from? Because I feel like the themes of generational trauma, it constantly comes up in the book, but are there any themes that you want them to take away or look for while reading the book?
Yes, I think that first of all, it's so fun when readers come up with their own themes. Someone said to me that it's a book about women overcoming and making lives for themselves and their children. And I was like, yes, it is actually. I just never thought about it that way, and then it's so relatable to everybody. One theme that I think isn't often spoken about is this intergenerational friendship that exists in the book. And it is between a 15-year-old girl who lives in Minnesota, actually, but she has traveled back to Karachi, where her parents are from. And she becomes friends with the older Rozeena, who's in her 80s. And it doesn't start out as a friendship. It starts out as, there's a little hustle there. But they end up being catalysts for change for each other. So I really wanted to show that I feel that sometimes you miss out on these intergenerational friendships, and they can really have a big impact on both parties, the older and the younger. And it's just something very beautiful, I think. So that is one theme.
We're taking a question from the audience.
I think because I enjoyed that intergenerational friendship so much, reminded me of one I had as a kid. So yeah, I was wondering if that was something that you had experienced, because it read so true on the page.
Well, thanks for those words. That's very kind of you to say. I actually did at one point live with my grandmother when she was in her 80s. And I lived with her in Karachi in her house that was completely empty because it was just her and myself. And it was the house that she and my grandfather moved into after partition, after they crossed the border. So that house is still in the family. It's got this sort of printed in the plaster. It's got 1936, so it must have been built at that time. And so I lived with her, and I became her favorite. I was never her favorite. Grandparents are allowed to have favorites. So all the cousins realized that something has happened here. She's become the favorite. That happens, if you're going to go live with your grandmother. Who does that, right? So there was that, but also my mother and my daughter have developed a friendship, and I don't know what came first. I don't know if it's the book that made that happen or the other way around, but we do travel to Karachi every year. I take the kids back every summer, well, when they were in my control and younger. And but when the pandemic hit, we had to cancel our plans. So my mother and my daughter decided to make up for it by doing a FaceTime call, or actually it's a WhatsApp video call because it's free and it's on your phone. every Sunday. So they did that so my daughter could practice her Urdu, and you know, they both like to talk a lot. And it skipped this generation because I'm just fine sitting there silently. But and now it's been what 4 years. My daughter is now in college, and still on Sundays they do that video call. Yes, so it's pretty special. Yeah.
I actually have a question on that. How has your life changed since publishing this book? So you talk a little bit about how kind of your family bonds are a little bit stronger now and new family bonds are starting to emerge. So just can you speak on that? Being an author and publishing this great book, how has things changed for you in a professional way or a family way?
Oh, well, I've always been an introvert. And so this is very hard for me. You know, book events, I love attending them. I just never imagined that I would have to be on this side. I mean, I'm thrilled. I'm very grateful to the readers because without them, there are no books. And so it's been quite a change for me to, it does feel like you're exposing yourself, even though it's fiction. But, you know, when you write fiction, there's so much truth behind it. And so you feel vulnerable that way. And I think family that's read it, that's apart from my parents, but cousins even, you know, they recognize things, the house, the place, you know. So hearing from them, you feel like, you know, one of them said to me that it's so brave of you to do that. And I said, but it's fiction. I don't have to be brave, but they know. So yes, it's been quite a ride, a wonderful one. Yes.
And today, authors are competing in a field where there's ebooks, there's audiobooks. So do you try to meet industry standards or do you try to deliver what readers want? And that's just a really great book, whether it be an ebook or an audiobook.
Oh,
And do you have plans in the future?
you know, I feel like I'm a reader first, you know, and I know what I like to read. So when I write, I want to make it something that I would want to read. And that is really what drives my writing. I can't put myself in, you know, becoming some sort of a bestseller or a niche book. I just can write something that I would love to read myself. And the audiobook question is very interesting because I was given little audio clips to kind of audition clips for actors to read my book. And it was fascinating because they're so impressive. And I was told to rank them, to rank the top 3 and who I would love to narrate the book. And I just wanted this one person, Sneha Mathan, because she sounded just beautiful. And also I have listened to her read other books. I am an audiobook reader, if we're allowed to call it that. And so I was dying to get her. And I told the publisher, she's my number 1, but here are the top 3, but she's my number 1, you know? And they said, okay, we'll see if she can fit you in. So I was like, okay. And then I happened to be in Ireland with college girlfriends doing a girls' trip, which is quite wonderful. And we ended up finally back in Dublin. My flight was out to Minnesota the next day. We couldn't check into our hotel because it was too early. You know how they do that. And I got this email that they got her. They got Sneha for the audiobook, and I was thrilled. And they said, but she has 2 days. She has 2 days to do it, and here are 5 pages of words that you need to record and send to us. And so because she is South Asian, so she has a wonderful accent, but you know, South Asia is a big place. It's I think it's about 1.5 billion now. So every area has slightly different accents that nobody can tell except for me, probably. But so I didn't know what to do. I had to record them right then and there because I was going to be on this really long flight the next day, and then she would be recording. So I ended up in the ladies' room. because it had a really heavy door, and the lobby of the Dublin hotel had a bar and music, and there was no way I could do it there. We couldn't check in. So I stood in the ladies' room like this, actually, on my phone. And I just read those words and recorded them. Each time someone came in, I'd have to pause. And I didn't get any tips. I thought maybe I'd get some tips because what am I doing there? But so that was, but she has done an amazing job. And I hear from readers or listeners now, and they say, oh, she was fantastic. So, and I, of course, reached out to her, and we're friends now on social media. Yes.
We're taking a question from an audience member.
Live audience. So Julie's asking, was it your idea to have a prologue or did your editor suggest it?
Was it your idea to have a prologue or did your editor suggest it?
Yes, it was not my idea to have a prologue. And when my editor didn't suggest it, my agent suggested it, actually. And when he said it, my agent is, he was in London and we've never met. And so we do Zoom talks. And when he suggested it, I was like, oh, but agents say that you're not supposed to have a prologue. And of course, I felt very bad the minute that slipped out of my mouth. But he was very gracious and he said, well, I like them. And I'm like, okay. So we discussed what it could be, and he had some ideas, and I was really fighting it, actually. I really was fighting it. I just thought, just start the book in chapter 1, you know. And I wrote something which was slightly nonfiction. It was like an author's note, but in the front of the book. And I hated it, but I submitted it because I'm a good student and I did what I was supposed to do, and he hated it too. So I felt very happy that it was absolutely rejected. And then he said to me, just do what you want to do with the prologue. And then I did this. Yes.
I'm curious to know, why did you choose this book to be fiction? Because it does come off very nonfiction based, but why did you choose fiction as your genre for this book? And there's so much history with like your family, why did you choose fiction?
Yeah. Well, I honestly didn't think that it was a partition book. You know, I do feel that it is a relationship book between regular people. And we all have backstory, right? We all have things that made us who we are. And for these friends, Partition was their backstory. And so my focus was, and that's why it wasn't set in Partition at all. And the only scene you see basically in real time was what I read to you. And so it was fiction. I feel there's just so much more I can do personally in fiction that I feel safer. Somehow you address issues in a roundabout way rather than straight on, and that works better for me.
Readers often come to a book to escape their realities, and sometimes it's for just pure entertainment. So when they close your book, what lesson or advice should they be getting? Or what lesson or advice do you have for yourself when you were finished writing?
Yeah, when I was just so relieved. I do have, I have a hope, a wish that when readers finish this book, they've enjoyed it thoroughly, just the plot of it, the secrets and the revelations, that they've enjoyed turning the page to figure out what's going to happen next. I hope that they can feel for the characters, and feel the emotions that they're going through. But also, as they are transported to the other side of the world, I do want the reader to be immersed in a completely different environment, and yet come out with this belief that we are all the same. We are more alike than we are different. So that is what I would like you to think after you close the book.
And then is there any symbolism with the under the tamarind tree? So I know you talked a little bit about it, but if you could expand more on like the metaphor behind that, the tamarind tree and the fruit.
Oh my goodness, this metaphor question is quite interesting. I was in a book club with some readers, and one of the readers said to me, "Oh, that plant, that you mentioned that has the kangi palm, which has the babies that come out from the bottom and they're replanted. What a metaphor!" And she said, "How did you come up with that?" And I said, I just was completely honest, because what else can you do? I said it was organic. I had no idea I was doing it. I think some things you really, really have to work hard for, and then you get a little gift and some things just happen. So with the tamarind tree, there was a lot of discussion about titles at the publisher. Yes, a lot of back and forth. And my agent and I just really wanted tamarind tree in it because it is so representative. It takes you immediately to the setting, so we felt like there should be no question about what this book is going to be based on. It's a setting. And if any of you have read it, the setting, it really is a character in itself. So we thought, let's keep tamarind tree there. And then my editor brought in the under part of it, even though it sounds obvious, but it was very thought through because it gives a little bit of suspense to the title, instead of just a house with a tamarind tree, but under the tamarind tree, well, it raises some questions.
And then quickly, just for emerging writers out there and emerging authors like myself, just curious about your agent. It seemed like your agent is a great person. Like they really wanted to keep the tamarind tree in there, and they really seemed like they advocated for culture as well. And so for an emerging artist coming into a publishing industry that's super competitive, how did you find an agent that was culturally inclusive for you and inclusive for your book and themes as well? What was your process in finding a good agent?
Yeah, when I was doing my intense study, those 4 years, I was basically studying the craft of writing, but I also then joined what was known as Twitter before. And because it was a place that you could just linger about and learn a lot about publishing. You follow the editors and agents and just read what they're saying. And that was one way of learning about the industry. And of course, there's so many there's so much free material out there in podcasts and blogs and things. But it was on Twitter that I saw this mentorship being offered. And it was by their agency in London. It was their inaugural mentorship in which they were going to select 6 writers and they would mentor them, but at the same time, they would represent them. So you would get an agent and you would be mentored in, about the publishing industry as a whole. So I submitted it and, I was very lucky to get selected. And he must have been open to a book with this setting or with a more international feel. That he wanted it. But I was hesitant when I submitted the full manuscript to him because it's, he is English, and I do mention some unpleasant things about the British and what they did in the colonies. So, but he was, totally fine with that.
We have about 5 minutes. Any last minute questions from our audience here at Rondo?
Well, thank you for reading the prologue. Is there another part of the book that is kind of like your favorite that if you could read to everybody, you would?
I like the last chapter. I feel it gives a nice punch, emotional punch. But honestly, I think if you ask many authors with published books, they will never want to read their book again ever, because you read so much and you read your words so many times before it's published that you've practically like memorized it, and You just have to read it so often. I can't even tell you how many times I've read it already. So a lot of authors are, and the thing is that you cannot edit them, right? And it's so frustrating because I'm reading it and I want to change a word now and I can't. So a lot of authors just never want to read their published book. They like holding it and smelling it. Yes, yes.
Any other questions from the audience?
So can you talk about kind of your life as an author right now? Are you like teaching accounting during the day and writing at night, or how are you putting it together?
I'm actually not teaching this semester, so I'm taking a little break, and which is really a nice break for my brain. Also, I find that I use very different parts of it when I do accounting and when I do writing. I literally have to turn off one side. It feels like that. And so right now I'm concentrating on this book and writing the second or the next. I can't call it my second because there's one, remember, in the drawer. Yeah. So my next book. And yes, I'm focusing on writing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, dear audience, for your attention and participation. Thank you, Nigar, for the conversation. And we hope to see you next week for an evening with Mona Power and her novel, A Council of Dolls. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night. Oh, great. You're so great. You are so eloquent. What a great speaker you are.
You said I feel like you lost like 1,000 calories or something running back and forth.
You are a pro.
Oh, yeah, you are so good.